All right, so welcome to another amazing episode of Edit Career School's The Scoop with your host, Kathy Belletti. So today we are bringing the fire with another amazing guest. This guy is definitely a heavy hitter. So let's welcome Director of Admissions with Quest College, Mr. Marco Velazquez. How are you, Marco?
Hey, Miss Kathy, I am doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. How is it going over there in your world?
Oh, right now it's a tremendous amount of work, but it's what you sign up for. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm on a new venture, fourth week. Couldn't love it more than what we're doing right now, honestly.
That is awesome. All right. So, Marco, I know that you have an extensive background in higher education, specifically in enrollment management. Plus, you're an adjunct professor. So, talk about jack of all trades. But let me ask you this. Did you always start there? Talk to us about your journey. How did you end up in higher ed in the first place?
Yeah, that's funny you asked that because I was a call center guy, right? So
Oh, wow.
right out of high school, working through college, I worked at a place, West Telemarketing, right, big in Texas. So I was there, and I had I guess several times that I worked with them, right? So I was there one time right out of high school, quit, worked some odd jobs. It was always my go-to, right? Whenever I needed I guess some type of income, right, to
Uh-huh.
supplement me as a student, because as college students, a lot of ramen, right, that you're working
Yeah.
with there. So
Crackers and
for
cheese.
yeah, so for me, it was like, hey, back to West. I know they'll take me. I'm still rehireable, right? So I would do that, and eventually one day I answered a Craigslist ad for what I thought was a call center. Show up, and it ended up being like a lower level admissions, right? So that's kind of how I got my foot into the door. My first admissions job at National University College, and it
Okay.
was online, strictly online, 100% in Spanish as well. So I did that for about a year, and that is how I got into the higher ed. From there, I just haven't left. It's something that I love. I grew a passion for it because at first I was like, I'm a sales guy, I'm a phone
Uh-huh.
guy, and nothing to do with higher ed, admissions, education, nothing about that. I was like, let me upsell you your credit line. Let me back in the day it was now it's like built in, but back in the day it was like,
Uh-huh.
let me sell you the phone service of caller ID for your actual your phone service, right? So
Yeah,
back then it's like call waiting, caller ID, and things of the sort there.
that is cool. You know, it's funny because I didn't come from higher education either. I came from outdoor sales. So I was walking door to door selling office supplies out of a catalog. Okay, so I had 30 seconds to get to the business owner in order to close them. And when I came into higher education, it's just something that I fell in love with also. And so it's interesting because when you talk about leading a team, specifically an admissions team, it's not always the easiest because they're dealing with rejection, time management, lead management, being disrespected from students, and a lot of times they tend to internalize that. And when they're doing that, sometimes the activity gets worse because now they're in their head. All right.
Yes,
So you
absolutely.
being an enrollment leader, what are some things that you do to keep your team motivated? Like, is there anything that you do out of the ordinary to keep them pumped during the day?
Out of the ordinary, I lead by example. I mean, I have an office usually wherever I'm at. I spend very little time in it. I
Uh-huh.
like modeling phone calls. If somebody comes and like, hey, I'm having trouble with such and such, who was the lead? Let's call it. I want to make
Uh-huh.
sure that I act like no challenge is too big. Even on other teams that I've had, I've had admissions representatives cry because of performance. Admissions representatives isolating themselves, in the break room because they're not doing so hot. And I've always taken it upon myself to pull the individual aside and say, and sometimes it may even sound like, oh, guy's so full of himself, right? But it's really the passion that I have. I'm pretty much like, hey, look, I notice you have potential. I want to take you under my wing. And I do that with the weaker reps. I also do that with those that lack the confidence, because at the end of the day, as you know, enrollment management, sales and education, we're not really selling education. We're selling confidence, right? So
Yep.
when the individual is able to attain that confidence, that's truly when the life changes.
Uh-huh.
But the way I work, or the way a rep might work with a student, is in turn the same way I work with a rep, right? I want them to
Yep.
see me as a leader, leading by example. Hey, if you know, I tell the reps all the time, hey, if you can't keep your word with me, why would your students do the same thing with you? You know, they're
Hello.
just falling in line. So just a few of the things that I do out of the ordinary, and then
Mhm.
of course, when it comes to doing the ordinary things, I do all the best practices. I'm every day I'm on an admissions call, whether it's role play with the reps from this school and other schools, or sometimes I'm on a manager training meeting, and I get feedback, right? Other DOAs, other
Mhm.
individuals that have owned schools, have managed schools. So just me personally staying open to learning. A lot of the times my reps that are tenured, they're just like, well, I've been doing it 23 years, been doing it
Oh
25
God.
years. This isn't how I work. This isn't what's good. Da, 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 da. But again, use yourself as an example, right? I'm on the calls. Just the other day, actually, it was like 3 days ago, I want to say, I jumped in to the role play and I put myself out there like if I was a rep, right?
Uh-huh.
So you got a director making mistakes left and right, right? I'm being
Yeah.
corrected and all that, but you do that to make yourself vulnerable, because
Hmm.
none of it is for a gotcha moment. Even for me, I'm not trying to catch you slipping, right?
Exactly right.
I'm trying to find deficiencies and areas of optimism so that I could work with you, right? So
Hmm.
that I can make you better, so that you can get some wins, and then more importantly, so that we can keep our jobs.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny that you said out of the ordinary is leading by example.
Because
That
you
may
know
rub
it
some,
is. You
but
know
I'm
it is.
saying exactly right. It may rub some people the wrong way, but the fact remains a lot of our leaders nowadays, they're not leading by example. They're pointing the finger, so they're being
Absolutely.
bosses instead of leaders. And there's a huge difference.
Yeah, and as a leader, you got to be a steward, because most of the time, when you don't hit your goal, if you didn't hit your goal, I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. Like, I didn't hit my last goal right now that I had, right? Granted, I'm coming into a new ship sailing, right?
Hmm.
But still, you didn't hit your goal. You gotta own it. And when you don't, it's not because you didn't have enough. It's because you didn't steward what you did have. You have to be a steward of your resources,
Yep.
and lead by that example, right? Hey,
Hmm.
we've only got 25 leads to work with right now. Okay, are we gonna
Oh.
work them to the bone, or are we
Uh-huh.
gonna sit here and talk about how lead quality wasn't there or lead quantity wasn't there? So just
Hmm.
some of my outtakes there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you bring up being vulnerable because I always tell my DOAs, don't be afraid to let your team see you sweat. Because being that person that comes in every day and you're always strong and you're always positive, that's not reality, first of all. No human being acts that way. And sometimes the team needs to see you sweat a little bit, but then see how you pick yourself back up.
Absolutely. And that, I got an example from my old DOA. Shout out
Uh-huh.
David, right? I walk in his office, he'd be in there listening to some Wu-Tang, really, really upset. I'm like, oh, they must be hitting him up. We must have missed the start. I know I hit my number, but as a
Uh-huh.
team, right? So I can completely agree. They need to be able to see you sweat. They need to be able to see you grind it out. They need to be able to see you take some L's and bounce back from them. And
Hmm.
then more importantly, they need to be able to see you sit with them and understand them as well. And you're not going to understand them if you're not doing the job that they did, or if you've never been in their shoes, right?
Exactly. Look, I've been in this industry over 16 years, and some of the people who were in the executive positions, I always remember the advisors saying, "Oh, they're giving us these outlandish goals, but they've never ever sat on the phone with the student. They don't know what it's like, to go through a conversation, and they're giving us these goals from up top." I
Facts.
think a lot of advisors respect when you're willing to roll up your sleeves and actually get on the phone with the student, going back to being vulnerable, right? Because now they're looking at you and they're like, so how did that feel? How did
Correct.
it feel to be rejected by a student? But now you can actually say, you know what, I totally get it. I know where you're coming from,
Yeah.
but this
And
is
it's
how I
not,
was able to
yeah.
overcome.
Absolutely. And most of the time it's not that bad, but
Hmm.
woe is me. So they need to see someone else do it, and pick yourself up, dust yourself off,
Yep.
and make the next dial, because as soon as you hear somebody on the phone, if you're not coming with it, if you're not ready for it, then boom, there is direct causation for your poor performance right there.
Exactly. So I've worked with tons of admissions leaders. Some were amazing, and there's a few who totally missed the boat. But anyways, in most cases, it's because they might have lacked passion or training, right? Have you seen this in your career? I'm sure you have.
All too often. I mean, firstly, as a director, the onboarding is a lot different, right? So I don't need a
Mhm.
whole lot of everything because I
Yeah.
it's good. But when you get a rep, you want to have that training, you want to have that onboarding. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it like I said it earlier, right? Rub some people the wrong way, but it doesn't exist in a lot of the. I've been in many schools, by the way, as director, senior leadership, so it
Yeah.
just doesn't exist. And I've even been to the point where you might try to save someone. They're like, well, that's not a strong rep. Don't try to save that one. Let them phase themselves out. Costs more money to have to hire someone.
Hello.
It's more expensive to do that, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
better off training. You can get their buy-in. And then additionally, I've been places where there is no training, right? There's just there might just be a manual on how to use the like a Genza bar, right? Like, hey, this
Yeah.
how you use it. By the way, I included screenshots. Boom, there you go. And then you might hear, a couple weeks later, like, hey, we didn't enter the demographic, right? Or simple things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of that requires training. So yes, I have seen people miss the mark completely. But not just with the training, because training is an ongoing, it's like a living
Yeah.
document, right? Training
Mm-hmm.
should never die. I am a strong proponent of the reason why you get Alzheimer's and things like that. It's because you stop learning, right?
You're
So
right.
so for me, not just with the training, but even like taking people under their wing, right? And being able to go in there and say, hey, look, I've done the job. I know what you're doing. I know where you're struggling, and getting their
Mm-hmm.
buy-in, right? To where they're like, all right, I'm open to your coaching. I've seen a lot of good reps have to leave because they're not receptive to coaching, but it's also because, the directors, the higher ups, they're not
Mhm.
trying to get the buy-in. And I know they're not trying to get the buy-in because there's no why explained behind any decision. It's just like, hey, now we switch the script. So, the the open-ended question we had from you 2 weeks ago has changed drastically into
Uh-huh.
something else. And the ref's gonna be like, well, that's great, but why did it change? Hey, just do it. I don't understand why you're asking. Okay, so now you got someone just doing work, but they don't understand, right? You
Yep.
also have to communicate to your entire admissions team the value of their piece of the pie, their piece of the puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big goal that you're hitting at the end of the day, but it all has to come together, right? So everybody has to feel like their part in participating and getting towards the goal. They have to feel like their part there is relevant, right? Like they're doing
Exactly.
meaningful work. I had a rep recently, even at one of the recent schools I was at. That individual got hired, and within her first 2 weeks, had already requested 4 meetings with me, 3 meetings with my boss, and
Oh my
it
God.
just finally snapped. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
her work isn't meaningful enough, right? She needs
Mm-hmm.
redirection, right? I need to define more of a process for her. So just staying on them and letting them know, because if you're the type of director where people are seeking you out and all right, what's next? What's the plan? Then
Yep.
you're failing at that point, right? So for me, it's like, hey, you got to know how your people respond, stay on top of it, so that you're not being summoned to 4 meetings in 2 weeks of employment, right? And that distracts them from the phone. So learning your lessons and applying it. I just had a talk, not even with a rep, with an actual
Uh-huh.
student. I was doing my DOA second, and that's what he was saying. Actually learning something and using it, not just learning. And I said, bingo. Wish some of my reps were in here, because we train and we apply it. We train and we apply it, not train and wait for that moment to come up. And then, hey, I didn't use it that time, but I'll be ready for the next one. You got to
Exactly.
apply it
You forgot
instantly.
it by that time.
Correct.
I
Correct.
love it. Buying is so important. I always tell advisors, the ones who survive are the ones who can continuously adapt, right? But there's a bigger piece there, because advisors, they want to feel as if they're included in the change. They're included in, this new process. So a lot of times I like to ask, okay, so what are your thoughts? What would you add? What would you change? Because now when it actually changes, they can say, well, I knew this was coming and I understand why this happens. So being able to understand the big picture is a huge part of the entire puzzle. So let's talk
Absolutely.
about our students for a little bit. So,
Okay.
since the pandemic, we've seen a huge decrease in enrollments across the board. Now, some schools, they're beginning to pick themselves back up, but there's still a lot of students who are afraid to come back to campus. What do you think is contributing to that? And is there anything that you guys are doing specifically to, get back on track?
Absolutely. So what I think is contributing to that, well, for starters, right, male of color, that's big right there. Though
Mhm.
that's the decreasing population there, right? So tapping into that, sometimes you might not get the enrollment, but finding out what drove them to not enroll and things of the sort, right? So that's big for me. Another contribution there, a lot of the social media, right? I've had people show up and they're gonna be an influencer. That's their career. They've
Mhm.
got it figured out already, right? Or they scroll down their timeline and they got XYZ friend who models swimsuits for Alpha Elite, and it seems pretty simple enough. So that's the route I'm gonna go, right? And I don't need school anymore. And then and you ultimately end up talking to those folks anyway, like a couple months down the line, right?
Exactly, man. They
So
work out.
yes, and so it's like just work smarter and not harder is what the message I try to deliver, and staying ahead of that. And then another thing that we're gonna do is giving ourselves more opportunities, right? Setting
Mhm.
as many appointments as we can. A lot of the times I tell my reps, when they leave with a Tuesday or a one for tomorrow, right? And I ask, and we listen to calls, and they're like, well, that girl told me her mom had cancer. I just couldn't do it. I had to let them off the line, right? I'm like, well, I'm not asking you to be disrespectful. I'm
Yeah.
not asking you to be insensitive, but just having those conversations, because the perspective I see is, look at it this way, right? You're going up to bat and you're saying, you know what? I don't need three strikes. I'm gonna go up there, give me two,
Yeah.
and just give me one pitch, right? I'm bound to hit it. But then you swing and you're missing it, right? And now it's like,
Uh-huh.
boy, I sure wish I had taken advantage of those two others that I left off the line really easy.
Exactly.
So for me, that's really what we're doing to get ahead of it. We know the interest is down. We know that enrollments is down across the board. Where I'm sitting at right now, you take a short drive, let's say 5 miles or less down the highway, and you've got six competitors already,
There
right?
you go.
So for us, it's knowing that, recognizing that, being ahead of that. I hope none of the competitors are watching this because they're learning secrets, right? But on top of that, you're really just pretty much getting ahead of it, right? You know that
Uh-huh.
they're gonna do the same thing, so you want to utilize that speed to lead, be the first one, build that rapport, getting them in, letting
Mhm.
them know, hey, look, you're pretty much in a sweepstakes right now, right? So everybody's trying to win you over, but you've
Mhm.
already came here, you're already committed. If anybody calls you, let them know. Marco at Quest College already helped you. You're good. And most of the time, they won't even have to say that, because if you prep your student right, they're not answering the line anymore, right? So that's
Exactly.
really just what it's really just the message. I tell everybody, the message that we have, it's always going to be the same, but the delivery, it's what's key. If you mess that up, then that's where you're going to lose right there, ultimately, to another rep. I was at those other schools, I trained, so I know what they're saying. We got to say something similar or better if we're going to win here.
That is awesome. I love what you said because I always tell advisors, they think that there's always tomorrow, right? In a lot of cases, not always tomorrow. So I'm
Yep.
like, if you don't do everything that you need to do the very first time, wonder if as soon as you hang up, a school calls 10 minutes later and they're more assertive than you, you've lost them. And in a lot of cases, marketing just lost $200 too for some of these leads, right? So
Hey,
it's all about who is able to connect with the student. And sometimes our advisors, they're afraid to talk to people. These are just
absolutely.
people who are looking for an opportunity. And it's
Absolutely.
crazy to me sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It goes back to, killing their opportunities and then
Yeah.
sitting there wondering what went wrong, right? And you mentioned, tomorrow, right? So that's another thing. You want to lead by example. It's like you tell your reps, like, how are you going to be the one that, does the tomorrow, and then you get a student here and you want them to enroll today? How? How, Sway? How, right? It's like you ain't got the answers at that point.
Oh
So
my
and
gosh.
and and I'm not a big fan of rock, but just for a AC/DC reference here, right?
Uh-huh.
TNT, today, not
Yeah.
tomorrow. You got to live by that mindset. Today, not tomorrow. Why leave something for tomorrow that you can accomplish today? You're right back in it where, if you got to eat a frog, the whole Mark Twain thing, right? If you got to eat a frog, make sure you eat that in the morning.
Yeah.
If you got to eat two frogs, you know the rest, right? So I'm real big on just falling back on little phrases, little sayings,
Yeah.
analogies, things of the sort.
Hmm.
Because even if they're not like 100% factual or science based or
Yeah.
research driven, they still make you smile and say, "Hey, that makes sense. Let's go and get it."
Logic.
Absolutely.
So Marco, let me ask you this, and I ask everyone this question. Where do you see the future of career education? And what do you think is needed to get us to the next level?
Ed tech, it's going to be the future, right? And I say
Yeah,
that I actually just completed my master's in educational leadership
nice.
last year, so it's been about 10 months now. But
Congrats.
the point I want to say is that I went from thinking, ed leadership was going to be dealing with teachers, people management, and there was a whole section on there where it was like that wasn't in the curriculum, but ed tech, they threw it in there because
Yeah,
they know that that's the future. I actually just spoke to a girl today, and there's varying opinions. Some people like the Zoom, some people don't. So the future is going to be somewhere in the middle, meeting your students where they are, maybe
yeah,
offering it as an option but not making it mandatory.
yeah,
I couldn't tell you, but I know that in order for us to get there, we've got to have a lot more people that care in the position of leadership. And I'll tell you that, not to say that folks don't care, right? Because
yeah.
many of them do,
Hmm.
but individuals that are decision makers and sitting there, they have to be able to relate to the students. Not so much my bosses, right? They're at the very top, but
Exactly.
individuals sitting in the director seat and in any department, right? Even
Hmm.
career services, financial aid, right? You
No.
have to be in the people business and you have to provide solutions. For me, if we're going to do that, then that's the way to get there in the future, being a solution provider. Well, your student don't have a ride, your student doesn't have childcare, your student has XYZ. Okay, so what? So does everybody else. Be
Hmm.
that solution provider, help them figure it out. A lot of the students that we deal with, they've never had to budget, right?
Yeah.
They never had to meet a deadline, right? So they don't work on timelines. They'll tell you they want to start a business. They'll tell you they want to get in the medical field, but there is no time base. So you got to ask them time-based questions to create that sense of urgency. How
Yep.
soon are you looking to create this opportunity? How
Hmm.
soon were you thinking about starting your career? And they'll tell you. Usually it's ASAP.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to wait on something, right?
Exactly.
But as my boy TJ in Houston, Texas used to say, conversation rules the nation, right? And the reason
That's
I
so
say
true.
that is because if you can't talk to these individuals, if you can't answer their basic questions, they're not going to trust you enough to come see you for you to take
Hmm.
care of the bigger picture for them.
Hello. I love it. Look at you dropping some amazing gems, Marco. So, any last thoughts for our listeners or advice?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we are in the great resignation right now, right?
Mm.
And basically if you don't know what that is, right? Folks are leaving jobs in droves drastically. And
Yep.
my main message is that if you're looking for a career in higher ed or education in general, the
Hmm.
time is now, right? There's individuals that are already in there and they haven't acquired the skills, so they're having to upskill. But there's also room for you guys who are not in there, who are in other industries and want to make that impact. You can most certainly do it. The problem is that we don't get presented with those opportunities. I look at it
Yeah.
like, for example, working for a sports team, right? I'm Spurs fan. Let's go, right? So for me, right, like I would love nothing more than to work for the Spurs or maybe the Houston Texans or something like
Uh-huh.
that. Well, my whole life I didn't know that was an opportunity that you'd have that opportunity, right? So
Hmm.
just being able to meet individuals, right? Shout out Jarvis, right? When I was working at Jarvis Christian College. I was able to link up with many individuals. One of them being Dr. Mark Williams there, and I mean just having them present information to the students there. They've spoken with Jay Harris. They had him live in class from ESPN anchor. They've had Mr. Dalton, VP of operations for the Boston Celtics, and speaking to those people allows the students to say, hey, how can I get in your shoes, right?
Yeah.
So for me and in my industry, which is higher ed, I want to be able to provide that message like, hey, if you wanted
Hmm.
to come in here, I'm not the gatekeeper, right? The doors are open. You simply just got to seek the information, find it. Once you have somebody that's in, find out how you can get in. Ask the questions because we're willing to offer the advice. And most of the time we have I guess like a route or a career track that would be
Hmm.
perfect for you.
That is awesome. Well, you know what, Marco, today was definitely inspirational and it was a lot of fun. Okay, I love speaking to my fellow enrollment peeps. You definitely got to come back for part two, Marco. All right, but
Absolutely.
I know that you dropped some really amazing gems that's really going to take a lot of departments to the next level. All right,
Yeah,
keep
and
being who
I
you
look
are.
forward to hearing that feedback, right? Because if
Oh yeah, definitely.
anybody wants any follow up or feedback, just reach out to me. LinkedIn is the best way to get to me. You know that,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
I respond. I'm active. Not so much of a content poster, but every now and then you might see a little something too.
Absolutely. All right, Marco. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us today.
Of
All right, take
course.
care.
Yeah, likewise. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like to set up a free demo for your enrollment team, don't forget to head on over to lessons.motivatewithkat.com. This training is 1 year unlimited access for your enrollment advisors, and it's filled with tons of interactive videos, presentations. I'm giving it all away. They're getting all of my downloadable tools that will bring them immediate results. So if you are looking to take your team to the next level, don't forget, once again, that website is lessons.motivatewithkat.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Till next time, later.